The iron gate groaned in the wind, tall as two men and blackened from years of desert storms. Beyond it stood a figure who seemed carved from the very stone cliffs of Arizona, a man no one dared to approach. His name was Tahu, the richest Apache warrior in the territory, and to many, he was as much a legend as he was a man. His land stretched wider than the eye could see, bordered by jagged red mesas and cottonwoods leaning over a slow, dust-choked river. Herds of horses grazed in the valleys, cattle dotted the plains, and gold-coined spoils of battle and trade were said to be stored in cedar chests within his great lodge. But wealth, in Tahu's hands, had grown cold. For all his riches, people whispered about the hollowness in his eyes, as if each treasure had cost him something his heart could never buy back. For years, families had tried to wed their daughters to him. Some came from the frontier towns dressed in lace, hopeful and trembling. Others came from distant tribes, proud, painted, adorned with silver and turquoise. Some came bearing songs, strummed on guitars or carried by flutes. Others came with jewels, heirlooms, or promises of fertile alliances. And still others brought tears, mothers begging him to take their daughters as a shield against poverty. Tah, you had refused them all. One by one, he turned them away, his voice calm but firm, his gate forever closed. The rejected brides left humiliated, some bitter, some broken. He had earned a reputation, the cold warrior, the untouchable. Children in town dared each other to ride near his land at dusk, swearing they could see him standing in the shadows like a watchful hawk. Men muttered in the saloons that no woman could ever crack that iron shell. And yet, in the same breath, they admitted they feared him, his wealth, his skill, his name. The autumn evening that changed everything began with a sky of rust and violet. The wind carried the scent of mesquite smoke, and the coyotes had already started their mournful calls along the ridge. Tahu stood at the gate as he often did, broad-shouldered and silent, scanning the horizon like a sentinel. His long black hair lifted in the dry breeze, and the silver ornaments braided into it glinted against the last scraps of daylight. It was then that a figure appeared, a woman walking alone along the dust road. She was small, her dress plain, her step steady. No horse, no carriage, no escort. She carried nothing but a small tin box clutched against her chest as though it were heavier than stone. Tahu narrowed his eyes. Women had come before with fanfare, rehearsed smiles, and gifts meant to dazzle. But this one, she looked as if she had risen out of the earth itself, silent and unadorned, the dust clinging to her hem. There was no glitter of jewels, no tremble of rehearsed words, only a presence quiet and unyielding. When she reached the gate, she stopped. The world seemed to still, the rustle of grass, the far-off bray of a donkey, even the whistle of the wind dropped into silence. She looked at him directly, and her gaze was neither pleading nor proud. It was steady, almost defiant in its calm. For a long time, neither spoke. Tahu's hand rested on the iron bar of the gate. His reputation demanded distance. And yet something in the way she stood small but unwavering pricked at the armor around his heart. He expected words, a pitch for marriage, some tired plea for wealth or protection. Instead, she knelt slowly in the dust, placed the tin box at her feet, and without a single word, pushed it forward through the bars. Then she rose, dusted her skirt lightly, and turned as if to leave. The unexpectedness of it cracked something in Tahu. He felt his pulse shift, his chest tighten. No one had ever approached him this way, without speech, without demand. He bent, his scarred hands closing around the cool metal of the box. "Wait," he said. The word was deep, low, carrying more weight than the gate itself. The woman stopped. She turned her head slightly, the fading light catching the strands of her hair. Her eyes held no fear. Tahu straightened, the tin box solid in his grip. "What is in that box?" The question lingered in the desert air, heavy as the silence between them. The woman's lips pressed together as though the answer itself was a burden she had carried for too long. She did not move closer, nor did she retreat. She simply stood, still as stone, waiting for him to prove he was worth knowing the truth. For the first time in years, the warrior at the gate was not in control. Eliza Mayfield did not flinch when Tahu's deep voice called her back. She stood still, her back straight, her boots sunk slightly in the desert dust. The fading sun painted her in copper light, the kind that made shadows stretch long across the earth. She turned, calm and measured, as though she had not just left a piece of her soul in that tin box. Tahu, still gripping the cool metal in his scarred hands, studied her as if she were a riddle carved into stone. His eyes dark sharp, the eyes of a hawk, searched for the same signs he had always seen in others: fear, greed, desperation. But she gave him none of it. He tilted his head slightly. "Why leave this here? Why turn your back?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She only looked at him with a kind of quiet strength that unsettled him more than any warrior had on the battlefield. In silence, she told him she had no interest in begging, no interest in playing the games others had tried before. The gate creaked as Tahu pushed it open just enough to step out. Dust swirled around his bare feet, and the silver ornaments on his chest caught the last threads of sunlight. He stood before her now, close enough to see the faint smudge of dirt across her cheek, close enough to sense the steadiness of her breathing. Still she said nothing. "You come with no horse," Tahu said at last. "No escort. No gifts but this box. Do you think silence is enough to earn a place here?" Her gaze did not falter. Slowly, carefully, she shook her head. Then her voice, soft but steady, slipped into the air. "I don't want a place here." The word struck him like an arrow. He had heard every variation of plea before. "I want your wealth. I want your name. I want your land. I want your protection." But never once had anyone said they wanted nothing from him. He frowned. "Then why stand at my gate?" Eliza lowered her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she looked up again, her face was calm, her hand still clutching at the hem of her dress. "I came to leave something. That is all." Tahu glanced down at the tin box again. His thumb brushed over the lid, feeling the dented metal, the faint imprint of time. There was weight in it, but more than that, there was weight in the way she spoke, in the way she seemed tethered to it. He could almost sense the gravity of what it contained. "You would give this to me," he said slowly, "a stranger. You do not even ask what I will do with it." Eliza's shoulders lifted slightly in the faintest shrug. "It does not matter what you do with it. What mattered was bringing it here." The wind sighed through the cottonwoods by the river. For a long moment, the two stood in stillness, one warrior, one quiet woman, an unlikely pair in the twilight of the desert. Tahu, against every instinct he had trained into himself, felt curiosity gnawing at him. His life had been built on refusal, on the hard edges of saying no, on closing the gate against every hand that reached for him. But this woman had not reached. She had placed her burden at his feet and turned away. That kind of courage, or perhaps that kind of sorrow, was not something he could ignore. He shifted his weight, the gate behind him groaning softly as it swayed. "You are far from town," he said, his voice quieter now. "Do you fear walking back alone in the dark?" Her eyes flickered toward the horizon where the first stars were trembling awake. "Fear is not new to me," she replied, voice steady. "And silence is sometimes safer than words." Tahu studied her a moment longer, then gestured toward the open gate. "Come inside." Her brows knit in hesitation, but not out of fright. It was the hesitation of someone who had lived too long carrying her own burdens, unsure if handing them to another would lighten them or only bring more pain. Eliza did not move at first. Then, with a quiet breath, she stepped forward. The gate creaked wider as she entered, her boots tapping softly against the ground within his domain. She carried no airs, no practiced grace. Only the same quiet dignity she had brought to the road. Tahu followed, the tin box still in his hand. He did not open it. Not yet. But in that moment, he knew the silence she carried was heavier than any jewel, heavier than gold, heavier even than grief. It was a silence that demanded listening. And for the first time in years, the cold Apache warrior found himself willing to listen. Tahu set the tin box on a flat stone table inside the wide, dim hall of his lodge. Firelight flickered from a pit in the center, throwing long shadows against the timber walls. Spears, shields, and animal hides decorated the room, but despite its grandeur, it felt hollow. The air smelled faintly of smoke and leather, but beneath it lingered an emptiness like a home built for many, now serving only one. Eliza stood a few paces back, her hands folded in front of her, her boots leaving faint trails of dust across the wooden floor. She said nothing, only watched him with those calm, steady eyes. Tahu's scarred hands hesitated over the lid. He had opened countless chests of gold, countless sacks of silver, countless treasures taken in raids or trades. But never had he touched something that radiated such quiet weight. With a soft scrape of metal, he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a strip of faded cloth, were ashes gray, fine, carefully bundled. Resting on top was a locket, its brass dulled and scratched from years of wear. Tahu picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. The hinge creaked as he opened it, revealing a tiny, faded sketch of a young man. His face carried a resemblance to Eliza, the same jawline, the same quiet strength in the eyes. Tahu's brow furrowed. "Who is this?" Eliza stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly, though her voice did not. "My brother," she said. His name was Daniel. Tahu's gaze shifted from the locket to the ashes. "He is dead." "Yes." Her voice was steady, though her lips quivered as the word passed them. "He was killed 2 winters ago. Shot while trying to defend settlers who had wronged him. They took his life and left his body where he fell. No marker, no prayer. Just dust." The fire crackled, its warmth filling the silence between them. Tahu closed the locket carefully and set it back atop the cloth. "And why bring him here? To me?" Eliza drew a breath, her eyes locked on the flames. "Because I heard you honor the forgotten." She finally looked at him, and her eyes carried something more piercing than anger, deeper than grief. "They say you refuse every bride, but they also say you bury the nameless dead. That you give prayers where others give nothing." Tahu's jaw tightened. He had thought his small, private rituals went unseen, gathering bones left on battlefields, carving marks into stones for the unclaimed. He did not do it for recognition. He did it because he knew what it was to lose and be left with nothing but silence. "You asked me to keep him," Tahu said slowly, his voice low. "To let his ashes rest among my land?" Eliza shook her head gently. "No, I ask you to remember him. To let him not vanish from the world like smoke." Her eyes softened, but her tone did not waver. "I brought him here because your land holds memory, because you remember what others choose to forget." For the first time in years, Tahu felt something shift inside him. He had been offered dowries of silver, promises of loyalty, even blood ties to powerful families. None of them stirred him. Yet this woman, with her plain dress and her quiet strength, had placed her grief in his hands and asked not for riches, not for shelter, but for dignity. He set the lid back on the tin box and rested his hand on it. "Daniel Mayfield," he said, speaking the name aloud. The sound of it lingered in the firelit air. "I will not forget him." Eliza's lips trembled then, though no tears fell. She lowered her head in silent gratitude, her fingers gripping her skirt tightly to hold herself steady. For a long while, they stood there, 2 figures bound not by desire, nor bargain, nor greed, but by the ashes of a forgotten man. The crackle of the fire filled the hall, the only sound in the vast emptiness. Finally, Tahu's deep voice broke the silence once more. "You have brought me something heavier than gold." His eyes, usually so cold, softened as he studied her. "And I cannot turn it away." The fire burned low in the center pit of Tahu's lodge, its glow stretching shadows across the timber walls. Eliza Mayfield followed the Apache warrior deeper into the vast room, her boots making a soft rhythm on the wooden floor. Though the lodge was enormous, big enough to hold 50 people, it felt empty, as though silence itself had claimed the space. Tahu walked ahead of her, tall and powerful, his bare shoulders reflecting the amber light. The tin box still rested on the stone table behind them, untouched now but heavy in its presence. Eliza's eyes wandered as she took in the warrior's world. The walls were lined with weapon spears tipped with obsidian, shields painted in bold patterns, bows strung with sinew. Skins of bear, cougar, and wolf draped across beams. Silver ornaments gleamed faintly from hooks, reminders of his wealth. Yet, despite the trophies and treasures, the lodge did not feel alive. It felt, waiting. Her gaze drifted toward the far corner. At first, it seemed like nothing more than shadow. But then her eyes adjusted to the flickering firelight, and she saw it, a cradle board propped against the wall, small and dust-covered, as if it had not been touched in years. Its leather bindings were cracked, its beadwork faded, but the shape was unmistakable. Eliza's breath caught. She stopped walking, her hand pressing lightly against her skirt. She had not expected this, such a personal artifact in a place otherwise stripped of warmth. Tahu noticed her pause. His dark eyes followed her gaze, and when they landed on the cradle board, his body stiffened. For a heartbeat, the air seemed to thicken between them. "That," he said sharply, his voice low and rough, "is not meant to be spoken of." Eliza turned her eyes back to him, her face calm but not cold. "I will not speak of it," she said softly. Her words carried no judgment, no curiosity disguised as kindness. Just a promise. She would not pry into a wound she had no right to touch. Still, silence pressed on them like a weight. Tahu turned away, his shoulders tense. He moved to the fire and crouched low, feeding it with another log. Sparks leapt up, briefly lighting the hardened lines of his face, the scars that crossed his chest and arms. Eliza stood a moment longer, her hands folded together. Then she walked toward the fire and sat across from him, her dress brushing against the floor. She did not fill the silence with chatter as so many others would have. She simply sat, her presence steady, letting the fire speak in crackles and sighs. After a long while, Tahu spoke again, though his eyes stayed fixed on the flames. "Every woman who came before you wanted something. Gold, horses, my land. Even my bloodline. They spoke of futures full of promises and children, yet none of them saw the ashes already scattered behind me." Eliza tilted her head slightly, her gaze following the dancing flames. "And what do you see when you look at me?" His eyes lifted to hers, sharp but searching. "A woman who does not ask. A woman who places grief at my feet and then turns to walk away." He paused, the firelight flickering across his features. "That is more dangerous than asking for gold, because silence makes a man listen." Eliza did not look away. Her voice was calm, but it carried depth. "I did not come to take anything. I came to leave something behind. My brother's name. His memory. I thought perhaps your land could hold it, because you—" "Hold memory." Tahu's jaw tightened. He remembered the cradle board in the corner, the dust on its leather. He remembered the nights he had prayed to the spirits for a child who never drew a breath, and the way the world had moved on while he remained in shadow. Memory to him was both a gift and a curse. The fire cracked sharply, and both flinched at the sound. Though neither spoke of it, finally Eliza leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped around her knees. I do not need you to carry my grief, Tahu. I only needed someone not to cast it aside. Her voice trembled faintly at the edges now, though her face held steady. And you? You seemed like a man who would not forget. Tahu studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he leaned back, his muscles relaxing just slightly, the fight leaving his posture. Perhaps, he said quietly, you know me better than those who claim to. The firelight flickered between them, and for the first time since she stepped through his gate, the emptiness in the lodge did not feel quite so heavy. The fire in Tahu's lodge grew stronger as he laid another log across the glowing embers. Sparks leapt upward, showering the dark rafters with brief bursts of light before vanishing. Shadows stretched and folded across the walls, sliding over weapons, hides, and ornaments until they landed on Eliza Mayfield's quiet form. She sat across from him on a woven mat, her hands resting in her lap. The tin box remained on the stone table behind them, a silent witness to their conversation. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of smoke and the faint tang of resin. Tahu leaned forward, his broad shoulders catching the orange light, scars etched across his chest and arms like maps of battles fought. For a long while, he only watched the flames, his jaw set in hard lines. Finally, his voice broke the silence. Do you know why I refuse every bride who comes to my gate? Eliza lifted her eyes, calm but searching. I know what people in town say. That you are cold. That you trust no one. He gave a humorless laugh, deep and brief. Cold. He repeated the word as if testing its truth. Perhaps they are right. But it is not coldness that guides me. It is memory. Eliza tilted her head slightly, waiting. Tahu's eyes flickered to the cradle board in the corner, dust clinging to its straps and beadwork. His voice dropped lower. I once had a family. A wife who came to me not for gold, not for land, but because she believed in me. She was strong, proud, unafraid. We thought we would build something together. And for a time, we did. He paused, his chest rising and falling, the firelight glinting on the silver jewelry across his chest. But wealth draws enemies. Land draws envy. And those who could not break me sought to break what I loved. She died because she bore my name. The child we hoped for never drew breath. Since that day, I have refused every woman. I will not make another grave for the sake of desire. The words hung heavy in the smoke-filled air. Eliza's fingers tightened together in her lap. She did not rush to speak. Instead, she let his pain breathe, her silence a vessel instead of a void. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. You believe refusing the world keeps it from touching you. But the world does not wait outside your gate, Tahu. It comes whether you open the gate or not. Tahu's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in thought. Her words slipped past the armor he had built, striking at the truth he rarely let himself face. You think I should have taken one of them? He asked almost bitterly. The daughters who came with songs rehearsed in their throats? The ones who saw only the shine of my silver? Tell me, which of them would have stood when bullets came at dawn? Eliza held his gaze. Her voice did not rise. It remained quiet, and yet it carried the weight of certainty. Perhaps none of them. But you never gave them the chance to prove it. The fire crackled between them, a sharp pop echoing through the hollow lodge. Tahu's jaw tightened again, but his eyes dark, stormy, uncertain remained locked on hers. Eliza leaned slightly closer, her plain dress brushing against the floor. I did not come here for gold, or for land, or for your name. I came because I could not let my brother's memory vanish. You think every woman asks for something. But not every woman does. Her hands trembled faintly, though she clenched them to stillness. Sometimes, A woman brings something of her own to give. The words settled between them like ash on cooling embers. Tahu studied her, his face unreadable. For years he had kept his heart behind walls thicker than stone, a fortress none had breached. And yet, across from him sat a woman who had stepped inside not with force, not with pleas, but with silence, and silence had become her weapon. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. "You speak with little sound, Eliza Mayfield," he said, voice softer now. "But your silence carries more than the loudest song." Eliza lowered her gaze briefly, her lips curving in something that was not quite a smile, but close. "Then perhaps," she murmured, "it is time someone listened." The fire crackled louder then, as if agreeing, and the heavy stillness of the lodge seemed to shift, just a little. For the first time in years, Tahu felt something flicker inside him, faint but undeniable. Not desire, not yet, but a spark. A fire rekindled. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert like a blade of silver, slicing through the night's shadows. Outside Tahu's lodge, coyotes sang their last mournful cries before the sun swallowed the horizon. The world should have been still, but it wasn't. Horses snorted beyond the hills. Men's voices carried low and sharp on the wind. Trouble was coming. Inside, the fire had burned down to red embers. Tahu stood near the doorway, every muscle taut, his long black hair falling in a curtain over his shoulders. His sharp eyes scanned the pale horizon through the cracks in the gate. He could sense the shift in the air the way a wolf scents danger. "They've come," he muttered. Under his breath, Eliza stirred from where she had been resting near the hearth. Her hair loosened from its braid, her dress wrinkled with the weight of sleep. She blinked against the dim light and saw the hard tension in his frame. "Who?" she whispered. Tahu's jaw flexed. "Men who believe this land should be theirs. They think my refusal of brides means weakness. They come to take what I would not give." Eliza rose quickly, clutching the hem of her skirt. "What will they do?" "Burn, steal, kill if they must." His voice was cold, but his eyes flicked toward her with an edge of concern. "You should go." "Out the back. Now." But Eliza did not move. She squared her shoulders, standing smaller but unshaken in his shadow. "I didn't come all this way to run at the first sound of hooves." For a brief moment, something like surprise broke through his stone features. Then, with a reluctant nod, he tossed her a small hunting knife from the table. "Then stand ready. The fire inside you may serve us both." The gate shuddered. Dust rose in clouds as the riders approached. The pounding of hooves rattled the earth. Tahu pushed the wooden door wide and stepped out, shirtless and gleaming in the rising sun, his silver jewelry catching the light like fragments of lightning. He looked every inch the warrior they feared and hated, muscular, proud, untamed. A band of 6 riders reined in just beyond the fence. Their leader, a man with a scarred cheek and a red kerchief around his neck, spat into the dirt. "Tahu," he shouted, "you sit on gold and water while others scrape at dust. You think you can shut out every woman, every family, and keep it all to yourself?" Tahu's voice thundered back. "I owe nothing to thieves." The men laughed cruelly, circling their horses. "Then we'll take what we're owed. Burn your lodge, take your cattle, strip your land. And that little woman in your lodge, maybe she'll be less proud than you." Eliza's blood chilled at the words, but she gripped the knife tighter, her knuckles white. Tahu's body stiffened. His scars seemed to burn alive under the rising sun. He stepped forward, planting his feet in the dust, his presence a wall of defiance. "Try," he said, his voice low. Deadly. The riders surged forward. The first one swung a rifle down, but before he could raise it, Tahu hurled a throwing spear from beside the gate. It struck the man's horse's flank, sending beast and rider crashing into the dust. The others scattered, their curses filling the morning air. Eliza darted to the edge of the doorway, her heart pounding, the smoke of fear thick in her throat. When one rider broke toward the lodge, she didn't think she moved. With a cry torn from deep inside, she slashed at his leg with the knife. The blade grazed skin. He howled, tumbling from the saddle. Tahu was there in an instant, finishing what she had begun. Dust and fury whirled around them, the sounds of battle mixing with the sun's first blaze across the desert. But even as he fought, Tahu's eyes kept sliding toward Eliza, watching the way she held her ground, refusing to be a shadow. By the time the last rider fled into the hills, bloodied and beaten, the lodge still stood. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the smell of sweat and iron heavy on the morning wind. Tahu's chest heaved as he turned back to Eliza. She was trembling, her dress torn at the hem, but her chin was high, her eyes fierce. "You could have died," he said, his voice harsh with the weight of it. Her breath shook, but her reply was steady. "So could you." But neither of us did. For a long, silent moment, they stared at each other in the rising sun, the distance between them charged with something neither dared name. Tahu had spent years behind a gate no one could breach. But as dawn bathed the desert in light, he knew the gate had shifted. Not from force, not from fear. From her, and it would never close the same way again. The desert lay quiet again, as if the land itself held its breath after the storm of violence. Broken hoof prints scarred the earth. Blood darkened the dust where men had fallen. Beyond the lodge, vultures circled slowly, patient shadows waiting for the earth to surrender its dead. Tahu stood in the stillness, his broad chest heaving with the rhythm of battle's aftermath. The rising sun gilded his bronze skin, setting fire to the silver jewelry across his chest. His long black hair clung damp with sweat, strands plastered against his face. His eyes, sharp and dark, scanned the empty horizon one last time before turning back to the lodge. Eliza stood just inside the doorway, her hands trembling, the knife still clutched though streaked with dirt. Her dress was torn, dust smeared across her arms and cheeks. Yet in her posture straight, unbroken, there was no defeat. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the dying fire and the low groan of the wind shifting through the canyon. Finally, Tahu crossed the space between them, his shadow falling over her. He reached for her wrist, steadying her shaking hand until she released the knife. He set it gently aside, his touch lingering for a heartbeat longer than it needed to. "You should not have stood where blades and bullets flew," he said, his voice low but heavy with something more than reprimand. Eliza lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "And if I hadn't? You might not be standing here at all." The corners of his mouth twitched not a smile. Not yet, but the faint ghost of one. "You have fire, Eliza Mayfield," he murmured. "More than I expected," she swallowed, her throat dry. The memory of the fight, the hooves, the screams, the rush of adrenaline still raced through her veins. But beneath it was something steadier, something that had begun the moment she first stepped through his gate. She had seen his scars, his silence, his refusal to bend, and still she had stayed. "Tahu," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All those women you turned away, they came seeking wealth or protection or power. But I came only to return my brother's keepsake. I never asked for more, and yet, here I am." His eyes darkened as if her words pulled at something deep within. He reached to the stone table and picked up the tin box, its metal now dulled by dust. He turned it in his calloused hands, then placed it in hers. "This is yours," he said softly. "A brother's memory, not mine to keep." Her fingers curled around the box, the metal cool against her skin. But she shook her head. "No, my brother trusted you with it. And now?" "So do I." Tahu froze, her words striking deeper than any blade. For years he had carried the weight of grief like a shield, turning away every hand that reached toward him. But now, standing in the dawn's light, he saw a woman who had not come to claim his gold or his land, but who had given him her trust. Freely, without demand. Slowly, he stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking until the heat of his body mingled with hers. His long hair brushed her cheek as he lowered his head. His voice, rough and unsteady, broke the silence. "I swore I would never open my gate again," he said. "But you have walked through it without asking." Eliza's breath caught. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from fear now, but from something far more dangerous. She reached up, her fingertips brushing against the scars across his chest. They were rough beneath her touch, but real proof of battles fought, proof he had endured. "You're not cold, Tahu," she whispered. "You're only waiting for someone who sees you." The words unraveled the last thread of resistance inside him. With a low breath, he cupped her face in his scarred hands and pressed his forehead to hers. The world outside, the vultures, the dust, the broken hoof prints faded into silence. For the first time in years, his heart beat not with rage or sorrow, but with something he thought he had buried forever. When his lips finally brushed hers, it was not the claiming of a warrior, but the surrender of a man who had finally allowed himself to be seen. The fire within the lodge crackled, alive once more. And beyond the gate, the desert stretched wide and endless, not as a prison, but as a horizon. For Tahu, the gate had opened, and for Eliza Mayfield, it had never been closed.